All right, Bulldogs, we're going to spend some time here with the ASA, the Adaptive Security Appliance. Very popular Cisco firewall tool and VPN tool, and it does a lot of other things too. As a matter of fact, I want to mention this right now. This course will be 12 to 15 hours most likely when I've completed it. I really could give you a 12-hour course on the ASA if that's all we were studying, but it's not. So this is going to be an overview / introduction. This is not an ASA configuration exam. The commands are a little bit different. You'll see a couple of those. Actually, I'll show you a few in just a moment here on live route, or live ASA, I should say. But again, this is an introduction. As you'll see in the GUI, there are a lot of things that we can do with this tool. But we're going to do a little bit of firewalling, and we're going to get used to these SVIs, and I'll give you a guided tour in the next couple of videos. We'll take a look around. As with any Cisco GUI, even if you haven't seen it before, you can find what you need to do. Just remain calm. So let's go ahead and dive into this. We've got, on this particular model, the only one we're discussing in this course is the ASA 5505. And the reason I mention the model name, and I usually don't do that, is that when you are deciding what ASA to buy, this is where you really want to do your homework. I would spend some serious time with Cisco's website, and there are some great non-Cisco websites that go into discussions about licensing, because the licensing with an ASA can be the trickiest thing to do, as you'll see in just a moment, because there are some surprising limitations with what we call the base license. Now, we're going to use our old pals, the SVIs on ASAs. If you've taken your CCNP switch exam, hopefully with me, you've already seen those in action. If not, it's just a logical interface that we apply an IP address to. And I'll actually go ahead and show you what the config for one of those looks like on an ASA. And here we've got one called VLAN 1, one's VLAN 2, and one's VLAN 4. This is actually the command, the interface level command that you use to give an SVI a name on the ASA. It's name if. We've also got some security levels here. We haven't seen that before, so we'll be discussing that in this video. Notice here's one with a level of 100, here's one with a level of 0, here's one with a level of 50. You'll see me almost configure these in one video during the lab, and then I'm going to step back and then I'll go ahead and finish them, and we'll work with them a little bit in another video. So that's where we are right now. That's what we've got for an SVI. And something you have to get used to, the commands are just different than the router iOS that you're used to. Not 100% totally different, but still there are some different options, and as you saw the name if command, something different there too. Someone once told me that the kind of person who can become a world-class network engineer or network admin, whatever term you want to use, it's the kind of person who can work with something they've never worked with before and fix it. And I think that's a great way of looking at it, because, yeah, you'll have to use iOS help a lot the first time you go around on an ASA. Big deal. You know, it's just asking for directions. That's all it is. You're just looking at the different options. And it's just something, again, as admins, we have to get used to. Now, the ASA, couple of very important defaults here in this discussion. First off, it uses stateful filtering by default. And remember that stateful filtering, when an inside host sends a message that results in that outside host that receives it sending a reply back, then that reply will not be stopped by the ASA, even by a deny any, because we've got that state table that's being kept, and it's going to say, oh, okay, the ASA is going to say, oh, okay, an inside host started this conversation, so I will let the outside host continue it. As we'll see, the ASA supports NAT, it supports PAT, you can configure routing protocols on it, you can put static routes on it, AAA works with it, VPNs as I mentioned, and it can even act as a DHCP server. We'll take a look at that during the lab portion. Now, what about security? That's a good question. A great question, actually. The security here with the ASA works differently than zone-based firewalls, because there we had our zones and we put devices in them, interfaces in them, that was it. Well, with the ASA, we assign numeric security values to interfaces. And remember we saw those just a minute ago? We saw that this interface, VLAN 1, has a security level of 100. This VLAN 2 has a security level of 0. And this VLAN 4 has a security level of 50. Well, the higher the value, the more trusted the interface. Remember when you started getting your CCNA and we threw all these numeric values at you and we said, sometimes, the highest one's better, sometimes the lower one's better. Well, we don't have a lot of numbers in the CCNA security course. There's not a lot of numeric values, but here one we have to know, and it's the higher the value, the more trusted the interface. You'll see the following defaults on ASA interfaces, and we've seen them twice so far actually. The inside interface is going to have a security value of 100. So that is the most trusted value. That makes sense. If an interface is on our inside network, it should be totally trusted. Outside is totally the opposite. We're basically not trusting that one at all because we can't just consider the interface and the location as the traffic coming in on the interface. Traffic coming in on the outside interface, we don't know where it came from. We don't know who sent it. So we're just not trusting it. We're not assuming anything. Now the DMZ, very important detail here, the DMZ is optional and it has a security value right in the middle. It's got a security value of 50. Now the ASA numeric rule of traffic. How do we use all these numbers? The ASA forwards traffic by default, exclamation point. Probably didn't expect that. We usually expect it to be rejected. Well, the ASA forwards traffic by default if, and follow along here, the interface used by the traffic source to transmit has a higher value than the interface that's going to be used to route the traffic to its destination. So it's a fancy way of saying if the sending interface has a higher security value than the interface that's going to receive it, then you're gold. You're perfectly fine. Now, remember, stateful inspection rules apply. So replies that go from a lower valued interface to a higher valued interface, they're going to go through no matter what. So if A is talking to B, A is your inside interface, B is your outside. If A initiates that conversation to B, then B will be allowed to reply to A. Traffic initiating from a lower valued interface to a higher valued interface, that will not go through, again, by default. So, at least one of you smart alecks out there is thinking like the smart aleck behind the microphone right now and saying, hey, what if there's a tie? And actually, it's not a smart alecky question. It's a great question. And by default, again, that traffic is not allowed. So interfaces that have the exact same security level, you're not going to be able to do anything. That can be changed in the GUI, and I will show you exactly how to do that during our little guided tour coming up. One other default I meant to show you, didn't mean to skip it, but here it is. The ASA is not going to route traffic back out the same interface it came in on. Now that sounds familiar too, right? Well, this is another default that can be changed, and I'll show you exactly where to do that in the ASDM. You're going to like this GUI a lot because you can do these changes, and otherwise it would be a little clunky at first at the command line. Now let's talk about this licensing. The 5505 with a base license, which is what we're going to be working with in the labs, it allows you to configure 3 interfaces. I'm already at the maximum of my switch virtual interfaces right now at 3. I can't make any more. And if I configure that many, I'm going to have to choose one set of interfaces where traffic can't flow regardless of security level. I'm not kidding. It stunned me too because I was going near the end of the configuration the first time I used it, and I was using the GUI. And I was like, okay, I got this all set. And then it said, well, with the license you have, Mr. Bryant, you can't have traffic flowing everywhere. This only comes into play with the 5505 if you have a DMZ, which, as I mentioned, is optional. DMZ is always going to be optional to build. So if you're not using the DMZ, you're actually okay in that regard. But if you are, you're going to have to get a more advanced license. And I have a feeling we're going to see that little message come up during our lab. As a matter of fact, I'll make sure you get to see it. Now, a note about that licensing. The ASA licensing used to be very straightforward. And with the different models they have and the different capabilities we have and the different needs of businesses that we have, on one hand, you don't want people paying for features they don't want. But on the other hand, you have to make it available for people to upgrade as well. The licensing can get confusing. So what I would strongly suggest you do is as much homework as you put into looking at which ASA model to buy for your business or your lab to begin with, you want to spend just that much time with the licensing. Cisco's website is helpful with that, but there are some other non-Cisco websites out there that you should mention. I haven't talked to them, so I don't have their permission to put them on video, so I'm not going to put them on here. But if you do a search, say on Cisco base ASA license, something like that in Google, you will find these non-Cisco sites. They're just articles. They're not there to sell you anything, but they will discuss with you what the differences are, what the different licenses are with the different models, because it can get really confusing. Even on Cisco's site, you're looking at this, you're just like, wow, I don't know what I want. So you're always afraid to ask the salesman what you want too. You know, I understand how that is. So again, just some real world word of warning there for you. The ASA is a tremendous tool. I'm definitely not dissuading you from buying one, but you really want to do your research before you buy the hardware and you buy the license, because there's nothing more frustrating than thinking you're all set and you get it and you're almost done. It's like, hey, you need to give us more money to get a better license. So it's just something you have to be concerned with the ASA. Really, for the theory, we've got enough to go on right here. You know, we talked about the switch ports, the SPIs. You saw those here in the config, and you saw the security levels that I mentioned, and we will definitely be working with those during our tour. Don't forget stateful filtering. And I know I've mentioned that a couple times, but it's so easy to forget. But remember, when that inside host sends a message that results in the outside host sending a reply, the ASA is not going to stop that reply regardless of a deny any or regardless of the security levels. The reply will be allowed. So I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here. And on the next one, we'll take a look at, let me give you a little sneak preview here. This is our GUI that we're going to use. And this is not the main window that we're going to spend our time on. We'll mostly be using the wizards. But wizards I want you to be familiar with, including the Firewall wizard. We'll work with that as well. And I will see you on the next video, and we'll get started.